when we talk about ranked voting, in which I guess ranked choice voting, and I guess it's also known as instant runoff voting. What does that mean?
So the name evolution, and there are actually even more names, but we won't go into them all. But essentially, they're all trying to convey that you as a voter are given this new tool, that you're not limited to a single choice when presented with multiple choices, but in fact, you get to put them in order of your preference. You get to rank them. And so the voting process is very consistent with the name ranked choice voting, because you're ranking counts in order of choice, and the smartest way to vote is the most intuitive way to vote, is like, who's my first choice? I rank that person first. Who do I like best? That's my second choice, and so on. And some places allow you to rank all the way through the field if you so chose, and then you can have the satisfaction of having someone be your absolute last choice. So that's on the ranking side, voting side. And then the tally is described in a sense by the instant runoff term, because what you're trying to do is return or to turn a multi-candidate choice into a head-to-head between the strongest candidates, an instant runoff. So a lot of places have runoff elections. They're quite common in cities, and a number of southern states do them for primary elections. Texas just had a runoff. And you have an election, and if no one reaches the threshold, and usually that's 50%, more than half, then you take the top two, and they run a whole separate election maybe 2 months later or something, or a month later. And then you have a runoff. So the instant runoff is essentially, well, let's try to do that without having you have to wait all that time. Let's just let the voter decide with their ranking. So if my first choice has advanced and is a strong candidate, then my ballot continues to count for that person. If my first choice is a weak candidate and has been eliminated and has been defeated, my ballot then counts for my second choice. And when you get down to a head-to-head instant runoff, it's your ballot's going to count for whichever of those two candidates you ranked ahead of the other one. So it basically is allowing your ballot to be smart for you, and all you have to do is say who your first, second, third choice is.
So, okay. So we have Bill, Mary, and Steve, and Janet running. And I like Bill first. I like Steve. Well, so I guess that may get a little confusing without having the ballot in front of us. But but my second choice counts as a first choice vote if my first pick is eliminated. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, and it's actually quite intuitive. It's really so that if you went into your local ice cream store and you say, "Gosh, I really want strawberry ice cream today," and you go in, they say, "Well, we don't have strawberry ice cream," and you say, "Well, do you have butter pecan at least?" And that's your second choice. That's in a sense, if strawberry finished last in an election, then you got to settle on butter pecan, right? And that's essentially what's going on. The way to think about this in practical terms is when we say vote for president, and a lot of people have had their touchstone election where they've had to think a lot about this. But say I started working at FairVote back in '92 when Ross Perot was on the ballot in all 50 states. And he ran as an independent against Bill Clinton and George Bush. And he got almost 20% of the vote across the whole country. And when you looked at that election, of all the 50 states, only a single one of them was won with more than half the votes. So he was actually the margin of difference in 49 states. But he generally finished third. And in an instant runoff, if I voted for Ross Perot as my first choice and he finishes third, then my ballot is examined and added to totals of my second choice, and then it becomes a Bush versus Clinton decision. So you can have your cake and eat it too, in a sense. You can vote for the one you really like without having to worry that you're helping to elect the one you don't like. And that can be like Ralph Nader in 2000 or Gary Johnson and Jill Stein in 2016. These votes where people are sort of torn between how to vote, and this kind of resolves that conflict. And then when you more broadly look at it, we have tons of primary elections this year with very crowded fields and sort of fractured votes and people winning with 25% or 23%. And they often can kind of know that, and they can run in a certain way where they're only really trying to get 25%. In a ranked choice election, you need to figure out ways to connect with more voters. And the best way to do that seems to be more direct campaign styles of kind of earning their respect. And we're seeing that in cities, by the way. A lot of cities do ranked choice voting, and of course now we're excited that it's going to be moving forward in Maine for big elections.
Okay, well, I want to get to Maine in a bit, but so one of the things it does is it allows for people to vote for third party, fourth party, fifth party candidates without those people being a spoiler.
Right.
If I hear you correctly, because they can express support for that person, but if that person does not appear to have passed a certain threshold relative to the other candidates, then those votes are no longer votes are set aside essentially, and their second vote is then applied. And down the line, if their second choice is it doesn't hit that threshold, then it's their third choice, and so on.
Exactly.
My understanding,
in a sense, right? You're knocking the last person. The candidate in last place is out each time, and then the field gets kind of smaller and smaller, and then the final two are the two strongest candidates, and you essentially have a head-to-head comparison.
I want to talk a little bit more about how it will impact, or how you perceive it will impact, or how it does impact the behavior of the candidates in a moment. But from a voter's perspective, it gives them the opportunity to make this expression without it being a spoiler. What are the broad principles behind this? I mean, what is the theory? Is there a broad philosophical principle behind this?
Well, I guess you could come at it different directions. I think here's what I would say, is that when you have voters ready to tell you something important that we can actually use to help define representation, well, we should allow them to do that, right? So when voters are presented with a choice of candidates that goes beyond two, they often have meaningful preferences about more than one person, right? In a single choice election, you're only allowing them to vote for one. You're leaving a lot of information on the table. So you're giving voters more power to say something and making their vote stronger and making it more impactful. Secondly, you're upholding the principle of majority rule, right? So if you have only two people running, hey, whoever gets the more votes is going to have a majority. If you have three people running, the person with the most votes might not have a majority, and in fact might be strongly opposed by a majority, but they're then supposed to turn around and represent everyone and be seen as a legitimate winner, even if like 60% say, you shouldn't be my governor, I don't like you, and yet there you are. And so
largely that's what's happened. I mean, you cited Bill Clinton. I mean, one of the reasons why Bill Clinton was, I think, so susceptible to attacks at that time for a myriad of other reasons, but he came in as a president with 45% of the vote.
Yep.
And I don't know that people recall that.
Yep. In fact, Bob Dole, I remember him saying this. He said, look, I only have 45 senators or whatever it was for Republicans, but hey, he only got 45% of the vote. I'm going to filibuster like heck, right? And it sort of almost gave an excuse to do that. Now, I think Bill Clinton, in that example, would have won enough of Ross Perot's votes to be winning the election, but would have had the clarity that head-to-head against George Bush, he was the majority candidate. And I think that clarifies the strength of a candidate and essentially is just a more representative outcome.
Okay, so let's take a break here. When we come back, let's talk about the behavior that you anticipate it will, how it impact people running in the election, and maybe how it does impact their behavior. I also want to talk about what's going on in Maine, because it sounds like the voters want ranked choice voting, but the guy who probably would suffer at the hands of ranked choice voting may prevent it from happening.